Hello, and welcome to my podcast, Good Grief. My name is Dr. Christine Malone, and in this podcast, we talk about trauma, tragedy, and survival. In each episode, I will interview someone that has gone through grief in some way, and we will discuss the impact it has had on their life. By sharing these stories, we hope that others won't feel alone should they be going through similar situations. Enjoy. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. My guest today is going to share with us a story about a tragedy that happened with her sister and her sister's family. So, guest, if you would please introduce yourself.
My name is Ona Gritz, and I'm so happy to be with you today to talk about my sister and my experiences with grief and loss and healing through writing.
Yes, yeah, we will get to it, but I want to talk about your book before we finish today too, and we will have a link to your book in the podcast notes for our listeners who want to get a copy of that. So start with, what was it that happened with your sister? What was the background there? I've read your story, but just kind of start with us wherever you want to start with that.
Okay, thank you. Well, my sister was 6 years older than and I loved her, followed her around the house. I just adored her, and um, it was a difficult household that we grew up in together because we were raised under the same roof by the same parents and treated very differently.
Mm.
I was the surprise late in life baby that they coddled and adored, and I could do no wrong. And my sister was considered the black sheep of the family, and kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy where my parents kind of identified her as someone who got into trouble a lot, and so she got into trouble a lot.
Mhm.
And um, so she began running away from home at 12,
Oh.
and I was 6 at the time. And so in some ways, my grieving of my sister started long before she died. She would be in and out of our home, and the long periods where she was gone and we didn't know where she was were really hard on me. Um, and then my parents began to send her away, which of course made no sense to me as a child. Like, if the worst thing she does is leave home, why are you sending her away? But they sent her to what they called boarding schools to me, but in researching her story later in life, discovered they were pretty harsh reform schools.
Mm.
Um, that she landed out west in California. We were raised in New York, and uh, things started to look up for her. First, it was bumpy. She got involved with drugs and um, was kind of living a pretty hard life. But she met a really lovely man, and they connected very deeply and started a family together. They had a baby boy, and then she was pregnant with their second child. She was 25. And to help with the rent, they brought in this indigent couple, and the couple killed the whole family. My sister was 30 weeks pregnant at the time. I happened to be in San Francisco visiting right before it happened. I mean, literally the night before, we were sitting together in her apartment, and I met the people who did it.
Mm.
Um, but she disappeared all the time. So when I was staying with a friend in San Francisco, and when I couldn't reach her for the rest of that week, my mind didn't go to the worst possible scenario. I just thought, okay, this is what she does. She disappears. And when I spoke to my parents on the phone, they said, oh, they probably skipped down on the rent, just enjoy the rest of your trip. And then um, I think it was just a few weeks later, I was back at college, and we got the call that my brother-in-law's body had been found in the apartment. He had been shot. And then it was a few weeks before they found my sister Angie's body and the baby's body. All the bodies were hidden under the house, and but my brother-in-law's was closer to the front, and so they just didn't see hers. It was more buried. Um, and then I went through a period of just a period, decades of not really being able to feel it, not really accessing the grief, kind of talking myself out of, how fond I was of my brother-in-law, that I had this baby nephew that had died so tragically. I was so used to Angie being gone that, that was the grief I knew. And um, it wasn't until 30 years after the murders that, and it, I'm sure there's no coincidence here. It was at the point where I was the only one left in our immediate family. My parents had both died. We had half siblings that we didn't grow up with, and my brother and I, half brother and I, had grown very close, but he passed away, and soon after that, little things started happening that made me think about Angie again, miss her in a new way, and realize that I wanted more for her than, to just live in my fading memory. And so that's when I was already a writer. I already had published books. And even though I was mostly a poet, and most of my poems and my essays didn't really include her. And then after this happened, she was all I could write about and all I could think about. And I did a lot of research to find out all the things I didn't know about her life away from us, but also her life within the family, talking to estranged relatives who knew her before I was born, getting hold of her school records to uncover where my parents had actually sent her. And it's been quite an odyssey.
Yeah. So all that part where like the researching and where the school and that was all after your parents had passed. So it wasn't like you could go to them and
Yes,
ask them questions for clarification. You're doing all the research on your own at that point in time. Wow.
that's true. And I actually think I couldn't have let myself wonder those things and get curious about those things while they were alive,
Yeah.
because they were hard things to uncover about them, and I was close to them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I know. For myself as well. The family secrets, whatever things in the past that really no one wanted to talk about. So I completely relate to that, having to kind of find it out for myself long after my parents were gone and say, what was that all about? And kind of doing some research on that. And I found many surprises that I didn't expect, both good and bad. So I can totally understand that. So tell us about your book. I know you were writing the poetry, whatever, but then you decided to write a book specifically, if I'm reading that correctly, it's about a letter to your sister, a book that's written to your sister. Is that right?
It turned out that way. It's a memoir, and I was writing it initially, the first drafts, many drafts, just more about her. And then I found that, and was told by a really smart editor that I wasn't getting close enough to the material, that I was kind of leaving myself out of it, my feelings about it, my um, I'd left myself out of my own memoir. It's kind of an amazing
Yeah.
thing that I didn't realize I had done. And I thought, I don't know how to get close to this. I don't know how to, no, I didn't want to, in some ways, look at my role in the family as the favored baby, and the ways that I had hurt Angie, the ways I didn't stand up for her to kind of protect myself within the family. And then I was actually writing a poem, and I was writing the poem to her. And I thought, oh my God, that's what I need to do. I need to write this book to her, not about her, but to her. And it just opened me up so that I could tell her what it felt like to be me in the family. I could reckon with things that, basically apologize for things that I could have done differently.
Yeah.
It brought us both more into the book.
Right, right. And I would imagine it was really a healing experience for you too, to kind of go through that, right? I know for myself, as I shared before we were recording, I teach classes and I do a lot of work with grieving and so on. And I find myself feeling a bit dispassionate when I tell the story because I don't actually put myself in it. Like I can tell the story easier when I don't put myself in it, when it's not, when I mean by myself, I mean emotionally and so on in the story. So but when I did write my own book last year, I did find that I didn't have a smart editor told me that, but I did find I needed to connect with the more how do I feel, how did I fit in sort of thing. And when you're talking about being the favorite child, that's kind of that I would call it almost like a survivor's guilt, if you will, and that you kind of feel guilty in that I was favored, and my sister was sent to this school and so on and so forth, even though that had nothing to do with you, it was your parents, but still, I can relate to that as well, where it's just kind of, how do you put that into place, especially with what horrible ending your sister went through. So
Yeah.
let's see now, you have done do you write any other books about this type of topic or grieving or loss, or is most of your work other types of work?
Most of my work has been focused in other areas. I have a physical disability, and so I've written about that experience, and especially as a mother with a physical disability, and how um, being a new mother, when the job is so physical, how
Yes.
it really kind of changed my perspective on who I was as a person with physical limitations.
Yeah.
Um, I I'm just finished a book that grew out of the research I did in Angie's life. It's a very different book because it's written to for teenagers, and
Hmm.
it's written as a verse novel. So each chapter essentially is a one-page poem,
Okay.
in the voice of a teenager, but the setting is an actual reform school in upstate New York
Okay.
that's closed now. But for many, many years, from the 1920s, I think, through the 70s, it's where they would send what they called wayward girls at the time.
Yeah. 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 I've read up on some of those, and I mean, yeah, or where they would send children that had mental or physical disabilities too. Some of those places thankfully have long since closed down because they were none of
Yes,
none of them were a place where a child should be, for sure, and certainly not
exactly.
not the wellness for them. So, anything else you'd like to share, either about your book or your sister, or if someone was listening and they've been through something so tragic with a family member that they cared about, what advice or anything like that you'd like to share?
You know, well, what I would say is that not to judge your grieving process, not to judge the timing of what you feel and what you can face when you feel it and can face it.
Yeah.
It took me so long, ridiculously long, to finally be able to look at this story and bear witness to it, bear witness to what my sister went through. Um, but once I did do it, there were so many gifts that came to me.
Mhm.
In particular, getting to know people, family members, but also my brother-in-law's family. I got to know his brothers. I got to know um, the attorney that prosecuted the case, and realizing that this tragedy, as personal as it was, wasn't only mine. I wasn't the only one who went through it, and that was, in some ways that's obvious, but it wasn't obvious to me. I carried it around in this kind of secret, closed place for so long that finding those other people that it touched
Mhm.
actually was such a healing thing to do, because it meant I didn't have to carry it completely alone.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was just thinking as you're saying that. Is it's kind of not like necessarily sharing the burden, but having other people that like the benefits of a support group, for example, where you're all understanding and feeling the same thing, and to keep her memory alive as well. It's not just your head where her memories lie, right? It's other people where that knew her, or whatever, the husband's family, so on and so forth, which is part of her legacy as well. So that all comes to mind when I'm thinking about this as well.
And that's really what was behind the decision to write this book. One of the things that drew me back into it was hearing a song that she loved and realizing I'm the only person who knows she loved it.
Yeah.
When our half brother died, there was at his memorial, they had a slideshow, and pictures went by. They were playing music, and there was a shot of her as a little girl standing next to him. And I thought, I don't think anyone else in this room knows who that is.
Oh
And
yeah.
then I thought, she deserves more than that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so this book is my way of kind of giving her a larger place to live in the world. And it's not out yet. It's coming out April 16th. We're talking on April 1st, but people have started to read it. And every time someone reads it, I just feel like she's just that much less gone,
Yeah.
just a little less gone.
No, I think it's great. It's actually great. There's so many benefits from that. And one of the things you and I also talked about with finding benefits in bad things is not something people like to talk about sometimes, but I think it's important to note that, yeah, bad things happen and we can't change that. But we can find positive things in it. And what you're doing with your book and your sister is admirable. So, but yeah, this episode will air after the 16th of April, so people will be able to find your book then. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Ona, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you and hearing about your sister. And your story is very sad, but I'm so glad that you're making something positive out of it with this book.
Thank you so much. I've so enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Good Grief. To hear more about my personal story, please pick up a copy of my book, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival, available in paperback, Kindle, and Audible via Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, and other online book retailers.